Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of the top 10, if you've been following along, we've been doing basically a kind of a best of 2022. This is the biggest wrestling stories of 2022. That being said, let's jump right in with our number 10, Machine Gun Carl Anderson coming back to the WWE while still being the never openweight champion in New Japan. This is one of those things that I never would have imagined would happen. I know it's a stupid pun, I do apologize. But if you gave me a million choices, I would have never guessed that a never openweight champion would be on WWE television. Yet here we are. And he's been mentioned as such there. He's even went back and wrestled matches in New Japan Pro Wrestling at this point, which is crazy. He's even going back in just a few weeks for the Wrestle Kingdom show, which is astounding in itself because you're going to have AEW and WWE talent wrestling on that show. So, yeah, that's got to be a first, unless, there's some indie somewhere that's done it, where you have contracted wrestlers from AEW, WWE, and New Japan all on the same show. I gotta imagine maybe they'll try and go all out. I do believe they even got some Noah wrestlers. I believe Muda's booked for the show, which he wrestles from Noah. I would go all out, try and get some Impact wrestlers, trying to get a little bit of everything, even if you just put them in the Rambo, just to make the show overly special. But going off of that little sidebar, this was one of those things that no one could have ever seen coming, that no one would have expected to come. Him and Doc Gallows showing back up, not that you wouldn't have expected them to come to WWE, they're two greatly talented wrestlers, they're a great tag team. Just the fact that they came there while Anderson still held a championship in New Japan really made it one of the biggest stories, in my opinion, in pro wrestling this year. Going from that, our number 9. Sticking in the world of New Japan Pro Wrestling, the Guerrillas of Destiny getting kicked out of the Bullet Club. And I know Bullet Club in America hasn't kept the same cachet since the Elite left a few years back, but there's always been one constant, and that constant's been Tama Tonga. He's one of the core 4, he's one of the original 4 guys that made the Bullet Club. Him, Fale, Carl Anderson, and Fergal Devitt, aka Finn Balor. So to see a founding member and what has been the strongest team for Bullet Club over the last decade being kicked out, it kind of shocked the system. It definitely put us into where we're in a new era of Bullet Club, and whether you like it or not, I think they've done some really cool stuff. I kind of wish they would do something like maybe trim Bullet Club down some members, trim some of the fat away, because it kind of does feel like it's got to where the NWO, where there's just way too many people in there, or maybe even separate Bullet Club and give Jay White an evil group that has a different name. Because I think some of the stuff that Jay White is doing is absolutely outstanding. I just think that it's constantly going to be compared to Kenny Omega or Prince Devitt or AJ Styles' era. And I think that's a little bit unfair because we're talking about guys that had a foothold in American wrestling before being the leaders of the Bullet Club. And now you got a guy that doesn't really have that same foothold, and he's absolutely crushing it as a leader of the Bullet Club, but you just don't get to hear it on this side. In America, you don't hear a lot of people still talking about Bullet Club, which, again, to me, I hope maybe they disband it and maybe give Jay White something different, or they do a spring cleaning, get rid of a bunch of people from the Bullet Club, keep it down to maybe 5-6 people, have a guy for the main title, a guy that goes after the mid-cards, maybe a junior, maybe a tag team and a junior tag team. I know I just said 5 or 6 and that's probably more than that, but let's keep it narrowed down a bit. It definitely was one of the most shocking things, in my opinion, in being a New Japan fan. I never expected that to happen. I never expected the Guerrillas to get kicked out of Bullet Club. They were synonymous with Bullet Club, so for that reason, it made my list. Coming from that, our number 8. In the beginning of the year, there was a lot of talk of Ring of Honor just going away, disappearing, not being able to be picked up. In March, we get Tony Khan announces that he bought Ring of Honor. Now, say what you'll say about them using Ring of Honor too much on AEW, I will agree with that. And the announcement of Honor Club being the place to watch Ring of Honor television, I would have even liked better if they just put it on YouTube. I think it would have been more accessible to fans to watch. I think putting it behind a paywall, you're going to very much limit yourself. I would assume it's going to be less than 50,000 people that are watching it on Honor Club, and that's being very generous. So you're going to limit your eyes that you have on the company, and that's a critique of what he's doing with it. The fact that he picked it up, it kind of felt on a little bit of a lesser note like when Vince McMahon bought WCW. You can make the argument that AEW was built on the back of stuff that happened in Ring of Honor. The initial Dave Meltzer article or tweet that led to All In was while Cody and the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega were all in Ring of Honor. And the challenge that they created, go back, All In is a Ring of Honor show. It's just not Ring of Honor in name. They produced it, they gave the cameramen, the wrestlers themselves put the show together, but it was backed by Ring of Honor. And I know Tony Khan it's been mentioned that he had been looking into getting into wrestling before that, but that's absolutely one of the catalysts that made AEW possible. So for him to go back and buy Ring of Honor, and at this point, honestly, the thing that is most valuable of Ring of Honor is the history. The history with guys like Samoa Joe, the Briscoe brothers, Austin Aries, CM Punk, Bryan Danielson, Nigel McGuinness, Jerry Lynn as the champion, Tyler Black, aka Seth Rollins. You can go back and you have so much quality content there that is usable. I've been in the past called a Ring of Honor fanboy because of my love of the product that they gave. This to me was a major deal. Has he fumbled the ball a little bit after? Maybe, but we'll see. We'll see what happens in 2023 once Honor Club is relaunched. Maybe it'll be something great, maybe it won't. Now going from that, our number 7. Mickie James showing up at the Royal Rumble as the Impact Women's Champion. This is the reason why the Carl Anderson showing up as the Noah champion wasn't higher on this list, because we had this happen earlier in the year. It kind of set a precedent that another company would not only be mentioned on WWE, but their championship would be mentioned, and a wrestler would be mentioned that wrestles there. This was kind of a feel-good, do right by her moment after the way she was fired with the infamous trash bag being sent with her stuff in it. It felt right to have Mickie James come back. It felt right for her to be there, to be given the respect for who she is and how great of a wrestler she's been over the last 20 years. Very, very crazy to see an Impact champion in WWE, but that was a year. 2022, when we look back at it, it might be the most bonkers year in the history of wrestling. In any other year, this might have been the biggest, most shocking story, but as you could see, this is only number 7 on my list. So there's 6 more things that I think were crazier than this happening, when in most years this would be the number 1. Just an amazing moment, and an amazing moment for not only Mickie James, but Impact Wrestling and WWE altogether, in my opinion. Now going from that, our number 6. Everything involved with MJF and Double or Nothing and the work shoot promo leading up, and then him coming back at All Out. He may have been outshined by other stories that happened at All Out, but the whole progression of MJF, quote-unquote, leaving the company, being unhappy, being gone for a few months, coming back as the Devil, leading up to his championship, that whole story, and I know a lot of these other things we're talking about what happens outside of the ring. This took elements of reality, melded them in with a storyline, and gave one of the most compelling wrestlers of this generation, one of the best talkers of this generation, a microphone to carry it out. I thought when we're talking about strictly what happened inside the confines of wrestling, this is probably my favorite wrestling storyline of the year, the whole MJF situation. I thought it was all fantastic. It played out very well. I don't know that there's anything I could overly criticize other than maybe some of the timing. I do feel, and I did even put out a video about this, they went a little bit too inside baseball with his shoot promo on Dynamite, and they kind of vilified AEW a bit, which I feel hurt a little bit to the credibility of AEW. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. But overall, with seeing how the storyline played out, I still have those criticisms, but I still think it was a good story. I still think that you shouldn't necessarily cast Tony Khan in a negative light. At this point, we've seen way too much of that as a negative owner thing with Vince McMahon for the last 25 years. So, the yin and the yang of it, the way it played out, I thought it was very interesting. Now going from that, Or number 5, the White Rabbit leading up to Bray Wyatt's return at Extreme Rules. This was WWE thinking outside of the WWE box, going into whole different categories that we've ever seen them explore before. They decided to use a viral campaign, augmented reality. They played a song just at the live shows. Everything they did on the build up to bringing Bray Wyatt back, one of the characters and wrestlers that fans most clamored for coming back, arguably him and Sasha Banks being the two biggest stars that have left the company within the last few years that the fans would want back. This was absolutely amazing. It was absolutely fun. Everybody in the wrestling world was scrambling around. The guesses as soon as it came out was that it was Bray Wyatt. No one knew for sure. There was a lot of MacGuffins out there where it could have been something or someone else. It just made a lot of buzz and created a lot of interest in the company and the story, which with them using this new kind of storytelling, it kind of feels amazing that they're willing to do that and willing to bring that into the company and have the company move forward, realizing that they're evolving with the fan base and the different ways that stories can be told. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and the payoff so far has been pretty good. At the time of this recording, we just seen the first time that Bray Wyatt and Uncle Howdy were in the same ring or same area. They could be proved they're two different characters. I think that went a little bit on the hokey side. It played out a little too long. We should have maybe just seen just a second of Uncle Howdy instead of the minute and a half of laughing that we had. But I don't know where that's going, so I don't want to overly criticize that. So far, most of the stuff he's done has been very good and very entertaining. Now, speaking of entertaining, our number 4, probably, arguably, the most entertaining wrestler in the history of the business, the return of Stone Cold Steve Austin. For 20 years, Steve Austin did not wrestle. There was rumors anywhere from CM Punk to John Cena to any number of other things that he might come back for. This year at WrestleMania, we finally got it. We got Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Kevin Steen, followed up by the next night with Stone Cold and Vincent McMahon. So yeah, it was a lot of nostalgia that took it over, but just the fact that you have one of the guys that are in the WWE Mount Rushmore coming back and being on WWE television as a wrestler again, it was amazing. This would be like Bruno Sammartino wrestling somebody in 2001. That's just how crazy that is. I mean, it would be like, I can't even think of anybody that's retired for that long with that big of a star that had came back. Goldberg maybe be the best example. Goldberg retiring and coming back. And Goldberg, for as popular as he wasn't Steve Austin. Steve Austin's one of the handful of wrestlers that's synonymous around the world. I mean, you could go up to anybody you see on the street and ask them, hey, can you name me 5 pro wrestlers? And Stone Cold's going to be in that list. You're going to get Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold, maybe Ric Flair, The Rock, and then depending on who you speak with, you might get a Goldberg, you might get a Brock Lesnar, you might get a John Cena. But those other guys, they're the list. The Rock, Austin, Hogan, Flair, they're the guys that are synonymous throughout the world, or at least through America, with professional wrestling. Just to see him make a return, see one of the greats of all time doing what he's great at, is just fantastic. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. If you watch my last top 10, it was one of my 10 favorite matches of the year. Thought it was absolutely awesome. Love seeing Stone Cold again. Now going from that, our number 3. We're talking about returns. Probably the biggest return of the year. One that I would have never guessed a year ago would have happened. Cody Rhodes returning to the WWE. If there was one guy I was sure was going to be an AEW lifer that would have went up and down, whether the ship sank or whether the ship was sailing, he was going to be the guy flying the flag. That would have been Cody Rhodes. He was so instrumental in the creation of the company and the direction of the company and everything being built into it that to me it was unfathomable to have an AEW without Cody Rhodes. And then we get into the beginning of the year, and for a while we heard rumblings that Cody Rhodes and the other MVPs were not getting along. We get to the beginning of the year. We see Cody is out of his contract. He's going to let himself become a free agent. And even then, I thought there was a very distinct possibility he would definitely go back to AEW. I thought there was a chance he was going to WWE. But for him to show up and be the first big defector going from AEW to WWE after it's been the other way around with everybody from Ambrose to Brody Lee to Miro to Aleister Black, all of them leaving and going the other way. This being the first huge defection going from AEW to WWE really was amazing, and the reaction that he got from the crowd was absolutely outstanding. The fact that he got to keep absolutely everything that made him special, the American Nightmare, and play it on that level in front of that crowd, it just was amazing. I'm a huge Cody Rhodes fan. I think he's absolutely fantastic, and this, to me, just blew me away. Everything about it was scripted properly, it was handled properly, the threat was there. I didn't ever think it would happen. It did happen. I'm happy for him. I want to see him come back. Hopefully he comes back at the Royal Rumble. I do think he's on the short list of people that could potentially beat Roman Reigns for either one or both of the championships. I think it's him. I think it's Sami Zayn. Maybe Solo Sikoa. If it's Solo Sikoa, it's going to be a couple years. Braun Breaker's on that short list. But other than that, it's a bunch of people that I don't think WWE is going to put the belt on. Now, they might. There might be a situation where they decide Drew McIntyre, Bobby Lashley, Kofi Kingston, a bunch of other wrestlers can be champion. There's a certain few that I think are going to do that big pay-per-view, that big premium live event spectacle that a Cody Rhodes and a Roman Reigns would. Now, going from that, our number 2, from the all-out media scrum, CM Punk and what's been officially or affectionately known as Brawl Out, basically letting his emotions fly out, talking about Hangman Page, the Young Bucks, not getting along with them, then leading into backstage altercations, and we're months away from this now, and it's still something even today, even when I come to record this, we're still getting information about this. We're still getting talk about this. I'm recording this on a Wednesday. It's going to release on a Friday. And the talk was that CM Punk put a picture of him and FTR, which looks to be backstage, so thus fanning the flames. Is he coming back? Is he suspended? Are they suspended? What did the investigation tell? Whose side of the story is true? Who's getting fired? Who's staying? Is CM Punk getting bought out? Is he going to go back to WWE? This thing was one of the craziest storylines that's ever happened, or stories that happened in and around wrestling. This is right up there, in my opinion, with Medusa throwing the belt in the trash on Nitro, Lex Luger walking out on the first Nitro, X-Pac going back to WWE. This is one of those major stories like that takes a lot of the real world and brings it in. I'd love to see CM Punk come back to AEW. I think there's a lot of unfinished business there. I think there's a lot of money to be made. A CM Punk Kenny Omega feud is going to make a ton of money. A CM Punk and FTR versus the Young Bucks and Omega for the Trios Championship would make a ton of money. Even a CM Punk Hangman Page feud would make mega money because of what we've learned here and what had come out from this. If there's one thing I've learned from pro wrestling, even if something is real, 100% is shoot. It can be turned into an angle and money can be made off of it. I love to see it happen. Hopefully it does. Hopefully we'll find out very shortly. It won't be 7 more years till we see CM Punk again in a wrestling ring. Hopefully it'll be early next year. Now, before we get into our number 1, there's a couple things that were just off the list that were considered but didn't quite make it. First up, the announcement of Shinsuke Nakamura going to Noah to wrestle the Great Muta. 2 things kept it off the list. Basically, it's going to happen in 2023. And the second thing is, we've already mentioned very similar things with Anderson and New Japan and Mickie James and Impact. This has kind of become the normal now. WWE is willing to allow their wrestlers to work for other companies and work with other companies, which I think is amazing. I'd love to see a world where men and women could go to different places. Maybe at some point we get a Double or Nothing match with Jon Moxley needs a tag team partner and Seth Rollins shows up as a surprise partner. Or vice versa. We get a SummerSlam where it's Seth Rollins versus Roman Reigns with a surprise referee, and it's Jon Moxley. I just think there's so much with the world opening up like that, willing to work with Noah, being willing to work with New Japan, with Impact. Imagine seeing Josh Alexander being able to do what he does on SmackDown. Or Sami Zayn coming over to Impact to wrestle, to bring a little bit of shine to Impact, to get some viewers on that company. Or let's say some of the dream matches that are out there. Like, let's say you have Kazuchika Okada against Roman Reigns. Who doesn't want to see that? I know I do. Or maybe before he retires, Minoru Suzuki and Brock Lesnar. I mean, the possibilities are endless when the companies are willing to work together. I mean, we've already seen Forbidden Door. The wrestling world is opening, and it's kind of amazing time to be a wrestling fan, if you ask me. Now, next up, last but not least on the best of the rest, Saraya debuting in AEW, and I probably pronounced her name wrong. I know it's either Saraya or Saraya. No matter how I pronounce it, I think in my head I'm pronouncing it wrong. I digress. This would have been a major story in most years, but as you can see, we're chock full of craziness. A pillar of AEW going to WWE. Bray Wyatt coming back to wrestling. Wrestlers wrestling in one company while being a champion in another company. Tony Khan buying Ring of Honor. So yeah, it's been a major storyline, and part of it, and this is not a knock on Saraya, I really enjoy her. She's one of my favorite women wrestlers of all time. But it kind of feels like since she's been gone, other women have stepped up and become more prominent. Becky Lynch, Bianca Belair, Charlotte Flair, even in AEW, Britt Baker has carved herself in as being the ace of the women's division in AEW. So there's been a lot of women who have taken what Saraya was building and pushed it even further and pushed it more into the foreground. So at this point, and I know she's a major star, again, one of my favorite female wrestlers of all time, it feels like it's not as big of a deal because when she was a major star, there wasn't a lot of major women wrestling stars, whereas now, if she wrestled in the era of Bianca Belair, is she more popular than Bianca? Probably not. Or Becky Lynch? Probably not. Is she a better wrestler than Charlotte Flair? Probably not. Again, no knock on Saraya, just saying, it is what it is. Her coming back was astounding, but unfortunately, in my opinion, there's 10 bigger stories in pro wrestling this year. That being said, if you think I left someone off the list, if you think I put a story too low, story too high, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. Make sure while you're there, smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. And finally, our number one professional wrestling story of 2022, the retirement of Vincent Kennedy McMahon. In a year where the headlines were dominated by stuff like Brawl Out, by Cody Rhodes defecting, all kinds of insane stuff that you would have never seen in a million years in wrestling happening, the craziest thing that no one in the world would have ever expected, Vince McMahon left WWE amid a myriad of allegations, speculations, inappropriations, whatever you want to call it. A bunch of scandal led to the fact that Vince McMahon, the one guy that everybody in the world said you'd have to pry the WWE from his cold dead hands, someone that's synonymous not only with WWE, with pro wrestling. Much like I said with Steve Austin, if you ask people about pro wrestling, they're going to say WWE. Because I have friends that know I like wrestling, and they have no clue what Impact is. They don't know what AEW is. They don't know New Japan. They know WWE. They know who Vince McMahon is. They have no clue about the rest of the wrestling landscape. Arguably, one of the most compelling characters in the history of the sport, being forced out of the company that he built into a billion-dollar empire, so much so that there's rumblings that if they sell the company, they could get upwards of $10 billion, all built on what this man did. Good, bad, or indifferent. Look, I don't agree with everything Vince McMahon's ever done, and I know over the past few years his storylines have been very lacking in my opinion. However, you cannot disagree with the impact he has on the sport. This is kind of the George Steinbrenner of pro wrestling, and even so it's bigger because George Steinbrenner only owned the Yankees, whereas Vince McMahon owned the entire sport, so much so that he's made WWE synonymous. WWE is wrestling, whether you like it or not. To the common person, that's what it is. And it's just outstanding. The body of work that he did, the scandals that happened, everything came to this. I mean, the guy was Teflon. He lived through the steroid scandal. He lived through the Benoit scandal. He lived through WCW and the Monday Night War. He came out on the positive ends of all that. And then one thing that, I mean, let's be honest. Most of us who are wrestling fans have heard some of these rumblings for decades. The Rita Chatterlane stuff, I've known since the early 90s. It's all allegations. I don't know what the truth is, but we've heard those allegations since then. We've heard other allegations of how Vince McMahon is with female talent, and even with the speaking out movement that happened a couple of years ago, Vince wasn't even the highlight of that. And now all of a sudden, all this starts leaking out, and everything is changing, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying it's a shocking thing, that with everything that he lived through, everything that came to his plate that he was able to push away to the side and keep going on. I mean, he had the federal government going up against him, and he beat the federal government. I would have never, ever in a million years thought that Vince McMahon would step down before dying. But here we are. It's happened. And it happened in 2022. To me, in my lifetime, this is the biggest pro wrestling story there's going to be. There's nothing that's going to top this. This, to me, is what my generation in real life would say, like 911 is the biggest event of my lifetime. And it definitely is. It's either 911 or the Challenger blowing up. It's one of those two, and I would say 911 wins the two of those. For people of the generation before me, this is like the JFK assassination or Watergate. One of those landmark moments. 5, 10, 20 years from now, we're going to look back, and this is going to be the watershed where everything changed because the guy that was a catalyst for everything in pro wrestling stepped down. And I know there's rumors that he wants to get back, and maybe that's part of what's going to make insane stories in 2023. Maybe when I do this video at the end of 2023 and I look back at the 10 biggest stories of that year, I'm going to say Vince McMahon coming back is one of them. But at this time, and I'll probably be wrong, much like I said with the CM Punk thing, but with that being said, this is my 10 biggest wrestling stories of the year. Again, if you think something different, let me know down in the comments. If you made it all the way to the end, let me know what your biggest wrestling story of 2022 is. Well, that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.